When the other girls gathered by the river, their voices floated like birdsong over the water, sweet, high, full of life. But Zelma stood apart. She never sang. Not even when the older women clapped and beckoned her to join. Not even when her childhood friend, Imani, tugged her wrist and whispered, "Just hum, if you can't sing." Zelma's lips remained shut, her gaze lost in the current. The water seemed to understand her silence better than people did. Zelma was only 14, but her eyes had grown older since her mother's death, dark and deep like the night sky before a storm. Her back was always a little bent, not from age or labor, but from the weight of absence. Her silence was not the kind that came from shyness or stubbornness. It was the kind that settled like a stone in the chest, heavy, unmoving, unbearable. The villagers whispered. They didn't speak to Zelma directly, but their tongues worked tirelessly behind doors and under mango trees. They say the girl hasn't spoken since the funeral. Did you see how fast that woman, Maduna, moved in? Husband's tears hadn't even dried. She poisoned the first wife, you know. You didn't hear it from me. Maduna had come wearing white, as was tradition, but her eyes were too sharp, her smile too practiced. Within days, she had taken over the cooking, the sweeping, the shrine. Within a moon cycle, she slept in the dead woman's bed. Zelma had watched it all with the stillness of a stone, unmoving, unblinking. She never cried, never screamed. But something had withered inside her. Something precious. She no longer ate with the others in the evening. Instead, she took her calabash and sat near the clay wall, chewing slowly, always watching the door. Her father, hollow and sunken, barely noticed. He drank more now. And when he didn't drink, he simply stared ahead as if he, too, had buried something beyond his wife. Zelma's favorite place was the riverbank. Every morning before dawn and every evening after sunset, she would sit beneath the baobab tree and listen. Her mother had once sung there, lullabies, old songs of rain and rebirth, verses about mothers who turned into birds. Now there was only wind. Sometimes, Zelma thought she could hear a hum in the breeze. But when she turned, there was nothing. Only silence. Or worse, a sudden cold that wrapped around her like a hand. People began to say the air shifted when Zelma passed. That the birds near her didn't sing. That water stilled wherever she stepped. Children avoided her path. Even the dogs wouldn't bark when she walked by. "She walks with a shadow," one elder muttered. "Something clings to her." Zelma didn't mind. She didn't want to be touched. Not by hands, not by voices, not even by comfort. The only sound she longed for, her mother's voice, was gone. And with it, so was hers. In the early days after the funeral, Maduna wore white like a true widow, her eyes red from well-timed tears, her voice soft and cracked with sorrow. She carried baskets of yam pies to neighbors, offering smiles seasoned with grief. The women of the village, swayed by her sweetness and the warmth of her hands, nodded in sympathy. "Poor thing," they said. "So young to lose so much." The elders praised her humility, her devotion to her new household. The men whispered she was strong, a woman who stepped up where others might crumble. Maduna knew how to tilt her head, how to speak just enough, and when to cry. Her eyes, wide and wet during morning rituals, were the same eyes that glinted with amusement when no one was looking. The village saw the honey, never the poison. Inside the house, behind walls too thin for such cruelty, another face of Maduna ruled. Zelma quickly learned that silence would not protect her. It only made her an easier target. Maduna's sweetness melted as soon as the compound gate creaked shut behind her. Her words turned sharp, her hands quicker than a snake's strike. The bruises on Zelma's arms bloomed like rotten fruit, hidden beneath long sleeves, excuses, and silence. "Clean it again," Maduna would snap, pushing over a pot of stew. "You think your mother's ghost will do the work for you?" She slapped for slowness, kicked for clumsiness, screamed and imagined offenses. Some nights, she withheld food altogether. Other nights, she locked Zelma inside the grain room, where the air grew thick and the rats whispered secrets in the corners. Zelma never cried. Crying was for those who believed someone would come when they heard it. Maduna's rule was swift and unchallenged. She wasted no time in erasing the traces of the woman who had come before her. Zelma returned from the river one afternoon to find smoke rising from the back of the house. A heap of her mother's clothes, headscarves, and riding cloths burned in the pit. The scent of lavender soap and ash turned her stomach. "I'm cleaning your life," Maduna said with a grin. "Out with the dead, in with the living." Zelma said nothing. She only clutched her side tighter, where beneath her tunic she had hidden a beaded anklet, the last thing she had left of her mother. She had taken it from the ashes before the fire touched it. The beads were small, dull red, and strung on old twine, but when her fingers closed around them, something in her chest stopped aching for a moment. Maduna didn't know about the anklet. Not yet. At night, Zelma curled in a corner of her mat, counting the beads silently. But sleep brought no rest. The walls whispered. Sometimes it was the wind, or something that moved like the wind but heavier, thicker. The shadows danced on the mud walls, even without firelight. She saw outlines she couldn't explain, tall, slim figures near the doorway that vanished when she blinked. She heard the scraping of nails on the floorboards, the sound of water dripping when there was no water. Once, she woke to find the anklet glowing faintly in her hand, red as ember, hot to the touch. She gasped but didn't let go. Maduna, sleeping in the next room, began to talk in her sleep. At first, it was murmurs. But one night, she called out clearly, "She knows, she knows." Her voice sounded like two voices stitched together, hers and someone else's. Zelma froze in the dark, pressing the anklet to her chest. She dared not breathe. The next morning, Maduna acted as though nothing had happened. She smiled, made porridge, and sent Zelma to the stream for water. But her eyes flickered to the girl's ankle longer than usual. Zelma tugged her hem lower and walked faster. Outside, the world remained unaware. Neighbors stopped Zelma on the road to praise Maduna. "She brought me cassava bread this morning," said one woman, fanning herself. "She's too kind." "She says she wants to host a feast in your mother's honor next moon," added another. "Imagine that." Zelma nodded, her face blank, and kept walking. Her throat always felt full, not with tears, but with words too heavy to speak. The truth clawed inside her like a caged bird. That night, when Maduna locked her in the grain room again, Zelma did not cry. She sat in the dark and waited. Waited for the shadows. Waited for the whispers. And when they came, she was not afraid. One voice, just one, sounded like her mother's. It didn't say much. Only her name. But that was enough to keep her awake until morning. The next day, when Maduna struck her across the face for letting the soup boil over, Zelma did not flinch. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth and wiped it with the back of her hand. Her eyes, wide and dark, met Maduna's with the stillness of a lake before lightning. Maduna hesitated, just for a moment. Then turned away. The first time Zelma dreamed of the red lake, it felt like drowning in memory. She stood on cracked red earth beneath a sky that churned like boiling smoke. The lake stretched wide before her, thick and sluggish like blood. Its surface rippled with strange winds, though the air was still. On the far bank stood a figure, tall, cloaked in white, her face veiled by mist. Zelma didn't need to see her face. She knew that shape, that stance, the way her arms hung gently by her sides. "Ma," she whispered, stepping forward. But her feet sank into the red mud, and the woman turned away, walking slowly along the edge of the water. Zelma tried to run after her, but her legs felt heavy, as if she were bound by vines. The next morning, she woke with her heart racing and sweat soaking her clothes. She looked down at her ankle. The anklet was hot, warmer than her skin, the beads glowing faintly before dimming. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. That day, while walking to the market to buy okra for Maduna, Zelma limped. Her right ankle ached where the anklet rested, though she dared not remove it. On the road, an old woman sat beneath a neem tree, her skin the color of burnt earth, her eyes sharp like rain-season lightning. Her name was Mama Iro, a healer, herbalist, and keeper of things most people feared to speak aloud. "You walk crooked, girl," Mama Iro called out, without looking at her. Zelma paused, startled. "Your mother doesn't rest," the old woman said, now staring at her. "That's why your bones ache." Zelma stared back, unsure what to say. The woman nodded toward her ankle. "Not all beads are for beauty. Some are for memory. Some for truth." She waved Zelma closer. "When the dead whisper, listen with your feet." Before Zelma could ask what she meant, a group of women passed behind her, gossiping loudly about yam prices, and by the time she turned back, Mama Iro was gone. Only the scent of bitter herbs lingered. That night, the dream returned. Zelma stood at the same red lake, but this time her mother turned to face her. Her eyes were open wide, not with fear, but urgency. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her arms raised slowly, and her hand pointed to the water. Beneath the surface, something pale floated, not a body, not quite, something that looked like twisted roots, long and brittle, curling like dead fingers. Zelma woke gasping. Her throat felt scorched. The fire in the hearth had gone cold, but the anklet on her ankle burned. The next few days passed in a blur of chores, orders, and bruises. Maduna seemed restless, snapping more than usual, pacing at night. Zelma began watching her closely. Not just when she beat the rugs or stirred the soup, but when she thought no one was looking. Zelma noticed how Maduna always avoided the old family shrine. How she never looked at her late husband, Zelma's father, with softness. How she boiled her own tea separately from everyone else. One afternoon, while Maduna was away visiting a neighbor, Zelma climbed the rafters of the storage room. It was dangerous, the beams were thin, the roof brittle with termites, but something called her there. She had remembered, suddenly, that her mother used to store her medicines in the thatch, tucked where rats wouldn't reach. Perhaps, something had been left behind. At first, she found only dust, feathers, and a few torn bundles of dried leaves. But then, behind a loosened patch of thatch, she found a small gourd, sealed with wax. Inside were brittle, gnarled roots, the color of bones soaked in rust. Their smell was foul, like rot mixed with bitterness. Her breath caught. She had seen these before, in the healer's book her mother once showed her. Kalungo root, used sparingly in healing but deadly in large amounts. Her mother had warned her never to touch it raw. "Even its breath steals strength," she'd said. Zelma touched one root with the tip of her nail, and a shiver ran down her spine. She knew. This was what had been in the tea. Her mother had started coughing shortly before her death, a dry, choking cough that no herb could soothe. She had wasted away quickly, too quickly. And all the while, Maduna had been there, with her gentle hands and her bittersweet tea. Zelma climbed down in silence, the gourd wrapped tightly in a cloth. She did not cry. There were no tears left, only a slow, steady fury curling in her belly like smoke. That night, the fire crackled strangely. As she sat nearby, the anklet pulsed with heat, and the flames flickered in unnatural rhythm. When Zelma leaned in, she heard it, clear as a whisper spoken into her ear. Maduna. The fire said her name. The Festival of Mothers had always been a time of joy, a moment of reverence for the women who gave life, for the mothers who carried the next generation in their wombs, nourishing them with songs and stories. The girls of the village danced in brightly colored skirts, their laughter rising above the rhythm of the drum beats. They decorated baskets with wildflowers, offering them to the elders with careful hands. It was a celebration of love, of protection, and of strength. Zelma, however, stayed apart from it all. Her feet did not follow the others in graceful steps, nor did her hands hold flowers to gift. Instead, she sat in the shadows, behind the temple, her eyes scanning the movements of the others. Her silence felt heavy. Even as the younger girls whirled in their brightly colored fabric, she could not bring herself to join in their joy. Her mother's absence had hollowed out the rhythm in her chest, and her stepmother's cruelty had left her cold. The dance was not for her anymore. "Why don't you join us, Zelma?" Imani, her old friend, asked with a concerned smile, but her words were laced with gentle pity. She had never understood the depths of Zelma's grief, nor the terrible silence that pressed against her chest like a stone. Zelma offered no response, just the same hollow stare, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She watched them dance and sing, wishing only to vanish into the shadows. But that was when Maduna stepped forward, her steps deliberate, her smile wide and predatory. The villagers cheered, expecting more from her new role as the village's matron of the family. She had replaced Zelma's mother with ease, too easily, and now, she moved with a confidence that unsettled everyone but Zelma. "Come, child," Maduna's voice cut through the air, as though it was silk being torn. "Aren't you going to join the other girls?" The crowd turned to look at her, their eyes full of expectation, but Zelma could feel the growing heat of the shame. Maduna's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, her mouth curling into a smile. "You should join your sisters, Zelma. Your mother's memory won't dance for you. Why not make new memories?" Her voice was a sharp, mocking sweetness that made Zelma's chest tighten. "I don't want to dance," Zelma whispered, though she knew her voice would be drowned in the noise of the celebration. Maduna's eyes flashed with irritation before she called out loudly, enough for everyone to hear, "Look at Zelma, too stubborn to honor her own mother. She never speaks, never smiles, never dances." The villagers laughed, uncomfortably at first, but then with more confidence. They were too polite to challenge Maduna, and too eager to please her. "Let her be," someone murmured from the back. But the damage was done. The whispers would linger long after the music had ended. Zelma turned away, walking slowly to the edge of the clearing. Her face flushed with humiliation, but there was no place for the tears to fall. Instead, she clenched her fists tighter and made her way to the sacred tree, the one where her mother used to tie ribbons and offer prayers in the old days. This was the place where, in her dreams, her mother had called to her. It was the tree of silence, where the voices of the past whispered to those who dared to listen. As the festival raged behind her, Zelma bent to the earth and dug a shallow hole with a small stick. The breeze stirred the leaves around her, and the shadows seemed to grow deeper as she buried the chicken bone beneath the soil. The bone had been a part of the ritual her mother once spoke of, to offer something small and insignificant to the earth as a plea for protection. Zelma had never fully understood it, but the dream had made it clear. This was what she must do. Her fingers brushed the earth, and she whispered, "Mother, if you can hear me, come back. Come back for me." The bone disappeared beneath the dirt. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The laughter and music of the festival fell away. The wind began to howl. Zelma stood there, staring at the tree, her body trembling. The wind twisted through the branches, bending the leaves, and something shifted in the air. The once quiet voice in the back of her mind, the voice she had heard in her dreams, grew louder, stronger. It was a voice she had never heard before, but it felt as if it came from her very bones. "Maduna," the voice whispered, thin and drawn like a thread. "Maduna." Zelma's heart skipped a beat. She turned, startled, and her eyes searched the shadows of the clearing. The wind howled again, and for just a moment, she thought she saw the faintest outline of her mother standing beneath the tree, her silhouette blurred by the shifting wind. Zelma stepped back, her breath quickening. That night, the village's sounds were strange. The laughter, the drumming, the singing, all seemed muffled, as if the very air was filled with a heavy mist. The dogs that usually roamed the streets refused to enter Maduna's compound. They stopped at the gate and stared in silent terror, their tails between their legs. The women who lived nearby said they heard growling, but there were no dogs around. Only silence. Inside Maduna's house, things were different. The night was still, but Zelma heard something else, something that sent shivers down her spine. Maduna was speaking in her sleep. The words were not her own. They were strange, broken, twisted syllables that sounded like a voice from the past, a voice that didn't belong to Maduna. "Please," Maduna muttered in her sleep, "no, stop, don't, please." Her body shifted restlessly in the dark. Zelma pressed herself against the wall of her own room, not daring to move. She had not heard Madonna speak like this before, not in her waking hours, and certainly not in her sleep. The voice, the pleading, sounded nothing like Madonna. It was high, desperate, like someone trapped in a cage. The wind outside howled again, louder this time, and the moonlight shifted across the compound. Zelma could feel the shift in the air, the strange weight of something watching. Something waiting. And in the stillness of that night, as the world held its breath, Zelma knew the truth. The ghosts of the past had come to claim what was theirs. Zelma woke before dawn, the air inside the room still and cold. Her body felt heavier than usual, as if something had pressed her into the mat through the night. When she stretched her arms, her sleeve shifted, and something on her forearm caught her eye. She sat up quickly. There, just beneath the skin, glowed faint markings, thin curved lines shaped like vines, or script in a language she couldn't read. The glow pulsed gently, like breath, then slowly faded as the moonlight dimmed. Her heart thudded in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something deeper, a strange, humming awareness that she had crossed into something she couldn't undo. She stood and walked to the small, cracked mirror hung near the water jug. The glass had belonged to her mother, one of the few things Madonna hadn't destroyed, though it had long since fractured down the center. Zelma rarely looked into it. She didn't like how hollow her eyes had become. But this time, something made her lean in. She wiped the dust from the surface, her fingers shaking. At first, she saw her own face, tired, lips chapped, eyes wide from another restless night. But then the mirror flickered. A strange distortion rippled across it, and the face staring back at her changed. It was her mother. Not just her image, her presence. She looked older, worn, her headscarf stained, her eyes sunken. She was lying down, mouth parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The mirror darkened, then flashed again. Zelma saw her mother clutching her throat, coughing violently, reaching for something unseen. Then the mirror snapped back to normal, her own stunned reflection staring back. Zelma backed away slowly, breath caught in her throat. But again, she wasn't afraid. A chill ran through her bones, but her heart stayed firm. The fire that had started in her chest weeks ago was growing stronger. She didn't tell anyone. Not that there was anyone to tell. Madonna had stopped speaking to her except to shout orders or throw things. But something had changed in her too. Madonna, once so sure and sharp, now looked over her shoulder constantly. She moved around the house like she was waiting for something to leap from the corners. She muttered to herself. And at night, Zelma could hear her walking in circles, checking locks, peering through windows. One afternoon, Madonna stormed into the house, face pale and sweaty. Who was singing? She demanded, eyes wild. Zelma looked up from the sweeping. No one was singing. I heard it, Madonna insisted. In the kitchen. A song I haven't heard in years. Don't lie. Zelma didn't blink. Maybe someone wants you to hear it. Madonna's lips parted, as if she would strike her. But she didn't. Her hand fell, and she turned away quickly. Later that evening, Zelma stepped outside to fetch water from the clay basin and stopped in her tracks. There, in the middle of the yard, was a clay pot. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't theirs. It was round, reddish-brown, and sealed with thick black wax. The air around it felt colder than the night. Zelma glanced around, no footprints in the soil, no signs of anyone approaching. The dogs had stopped barking hours ago. She didn't touch it. She just watched it for a long time, listening to the way the air seemed to vibrate around it. When Madonna saw the pot in the morning, she screamed. Who brought this here? She shouted at no one in particular, backing away like it might explode. Who is trying to curse me? She kicked it once, hard, and it rolled to the side, cracking slightly, but didn't break. Nothing spilled out. Still, Madonna spent the rest of the morning burning incense and whispering prayers. Her hands trembled the entire time. Zelma stood at the door, silent. Later, as the sun fell low and the birds began to retreat into trees, Zelma sat beside the fire. Madonna paced behind her, muttering. I should have locked you in the grain room tonight, Madonna snapped. You're getting bold. Zelma didn't look up. She stirred the pot slowly. You should be more worried about the locks on your own room. Madonna froze. What did you say? Zelma turned and looked her in the eye. You heard me. It was the first time she'd spoken back, truly spoken back. And Madonna didn't know what to do with it. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her face twisted with something ugly, not anger, not fear, but recognition. As if she had just realized Zelma was no longer the silent girl she had broken. Zelma returned to her cooking without another word. But her back was straighter. Her eyes, sharper. Something had awakened in her, something her stepmother couldn't burn or silence. And behind her reflection in the cracked mirror, her mother's face lingered, watching. The anklet had been hidden too long. Zelma had kept it wrapped in cloth and tucked beneath the mat where she slept, always careful, always quiet. But one morning, as she swept the sleeping mat aside, her hand brushed nothing. She dropped the broom. Her heart sank. The cloth was gone. Madonna stood in the doorway, arms folded, her eyes glittering with triumph. Looking for this, she asked, lifting the anklet by the string between two fingers. The beads clicked against each other softly, too softly for what they held. Zelma's stomach twisted. She didn't speak. Her fists clenched at her sides. I should have burned this thing months ago, Madonna hissed. Always whispering to it. Always clutching it like it could protect you. She turned and strode to the hearth. The fire had already been stoked with dry wood, flames flickering eagerly. Zelma stepped forward, her mouth opening, but no sound came. Not a scream. Not a plea. She froze. Madonna crouched and held the anklet over the fire. Let's see if your dead mother will save this too. She dropped it in. The beads hit the flame, and the fire died. A cold gust of air whooshed through the hearth, snuffing out the flames in an instant. Black smoke erupted upward, hissing and curling toward the roof like a writhing serpent. Madonna staggered back, coughing, swatting at the air as the smoke grew thicker, darker, pulsing with something that didn't belong to this world. And then, a sound. Not a crackle, not a pop, a scream. Not human. Not beast. Something between. Piercing, layered, mournful and furious all at once. It rang through the compound like a blade dragged across stone. Zelma covered her ears. Madonna fell to the floor, eyes wide in terror as the anklet sat in the hearth, untouched by flame. The string was still intact. The beads glistened red, as if freshly polished. Zelma stepped forward and reached into the hearth. The coals were cold. Her hand closed around the anklet without harm. When she turned, her eyes met Madonna's, and for the first time, Madonna looked afraid of her. That night, Zelma didn't sleep. She sat on her mat, knees to chest, humming. It was a sound that came without thinking, soft, low, ancient. A lullaby. The one her mother used to hum by the river. She didn't know the words, not anymore. But her lips moved in rhythm, her voice rising and falling like a breeze through reeds. She didn't even realize she was doing it, not until she awoke hours later, sitting upright, still humming. From the other room came a crash. Madonna burst through the door, wild-eyed. Stop that, she screamed. Stop singing. Zelma stared at her, confused and still groggy. I wasn't. You were, Madonna spat. That song, that cursed song. She lunged, grabbing Zelma by the shoulder and striking her hard across the face. Zelma reeled from the blow, her head snapping to the side. The sting bloomed instantly, but she didn't cry out. She looked back at Madonna with wide, unreadable eyes. Then Madonna screamed. Her own hand had turned purple at the knuckles, swelling before their eyes. She clutched it, falling to her knees. What did you do to me? Zelma blinked. You hit me. Madonna looked at her as if seeing a stranger. Her swollen hand trembled. You're not a girl anymore, she whispered. You're something else. You've let her in. Zelma said nothing. She stood, slowly, the anklet in her palm, the same lullaby rising faintly in her throat. From outside the compound wall, a rustling sound interrupted them. The gate creaked. A neighbor, Mama Duma, had been passing to fetch water when she heard shouting. She paused at the wall, hidden by the shadows. When she peeked through the crack, she saw Zelma standing calmly, and Maduna kneeling in pain, cradling her own bruised hand. Mama Duma had seen many strange things in her years, but the look on Maduna's face chilled her more than anything. She didn't say a word. She simply stepped back, turned, and walked away. But the rumor began before the sun rose. They said Maduna had struck the girl and bruised herself instead. They said the fire had turned cold and refused her offering. They said the anklet could not burn, that it belonged to someone who still walked, even if buried. Maduna didn't leave the compound for 3 days after that. She refused food. She muttered to herself. She locked the door at night and lit incense until the entire yard smelled of ash and fear. Zelma, meanwhile, wore the anklet again, openly. She swept the yard. She fetched water. She even hummed louder than before. And when people passed by the fence and greeted her, she answered them. Softly. Calmly. But she answered. Whatever lived inside her now, it was not anger, not revenge. It was clarity. And the fire would not burn her mother. It began with the wind. That night, the air was too still. No insects sang, no leaves rustled. Even the dogs were quiet, their ears pressed flat against their heads, noses twitching at something unseen. Inside the house, Zelma sat by the hearth, her anklet warm around her ankle, her breath coming in shallow waves. She had been humming again, her mother's lullaby, but the sound had taken on a strange rhythm, one that didn't feel like hers. Maduna had been pacing for hours. Her eyes were sunken, her hair uncombed, her fingers trembling even when she tried to pretend otherwise. She had stopped cooking. Stopped speaking. The shadows in the house moved too much. And Zelma had become something else. The wind returned without warning. It slammed into the compound like a breath from the gods, rattling windows and lifting dust from the floor. The clay pot outside shattered with a loud crack. Maduna screamed. And then Zelma rose. She didn't rise like someone waking. She rose as if lifted, slowly, limbs stiff, her eyes glassy. Her lips began to move. But the voice that emerged was not hers. It was thick, ancient, rippling like many voices stitched together into one. The language was old, older than any Maduna had heard, older than the village tongues. The sound shook the walls. Maduna stumbled backward, tripping over a stool, clutching her ears. "Make it stop," she cried. But Zelma was not speaking to her. She was speaking to the wind. The neighbors came first, drawn by the noise. Then the elders, then the priestess, and finally, Elder Bako, who had not left his home in 6 seasons. He was carried on a wooden chair, wrapped in white cloth, a bone staff across his knees. When he saw Zelma, still swaying, still muttering in tongues, he nodded solemnly. "It has come," he whispered. "A trial of the wind." Gasps spread through the gathering. A trial of the wind was the oldest rite, a sacred ceremony performed only when justice was too deep for men to reach. It was said the wind held memories. That it knew the truth no eye had seen. But the wind asked a price for truth. It never left the guilty unchanged. Zelma was carried to the riverbank. She didn't speak or resist, her body limp, her lips still moving, the strange voice still weaving itself into the air. The river was wide and slow, lined with tall reeds that whispered even when no breeze blew. A circle was formed. Ash was thrown in the water, bitter roots burned at the bank, and the sacred staff of Elder Bako was plunged into the earth. "The child has been chosen," Bako declared. "The dead seek voice. The wind shall judge." The crowd waited. Maduna, standing on the edge of the ceremony, tried to slip away. Her steps were soft, deliberate. Her eyes darted toward the bush path that led out of the village. Just a few paces, and she could vanish. But as she reached the edge of the water, the river moved. It didn't splash. It rose, a slow wall of water bending upward like a serpent lifting its head. It shimmered under the moonlight, then crashed down in front of her with a roar. Not a drop touched her, but the message was clear. She turned, soaked in fear. Then Zelma opened her mouth and screamed. It was not pain. It was power. The scream echoed across the water and into the trees. And when it faded, her voice changed again, clearer now, softer, almost human. Her eyes were still unfocused, but her mouth began to form words. "My name is Naum," she said, her mother's name. Maduna gasped. "I was wife to Tunji," Zelma continued, in a voice too old for her throat. "Mother to one." I was silenced. She stepped forward, barefoot, her anklet glowing red. "She fed me the root of Kalongo. Said it would help with pain. Bitter tea. Every morning." My throat closed, my body shrank, my voice died. A cry broke from the crowd. Someone dropped to their knees. She wore my wrappers. Slept in my bed. Smiled at my husband. And struck my daughter. Maduna shook her head violently. "She's lying. This is witchcraft." Zelma turned to face her. "You told him I was sick from spirits. You told the healer not to come. You threw my ashes into the latrine instead of the river. But I came back." The wind swirled again, a hot, sharp spiral that lifted dust from the ground and sent villagers scrambling back. Then, from the center of the river, something floated upward. A necklace. Beads, identical to Zelma's anklet, strung tightly, dripping but untouched by water. It hovered above the surface, then drifted through the air like it was carried by unseen fingers. It reached Maduna slowly. She backed away, tripping, falling into the mud. "No, no!" But the necklace shot forward and wrapped itself around her wrist like a snake coiling tight. She screamed as it sizzled against her skin, glowing red-hot, binding itself until it vanished beneath her flesh. Smoke rose from the burn. The scent of scorched blood filled the air. She howled in agony. The crowd was silent. Elder Bako struck the ground with his staff. "The wind has spoken. The dead remember. The guilty are marked." Zelma collapsed into the arms of the priestess, her body limp, breath shallow. The glow faded from her anklet. The trial was over. But the truth had just begun to breathe. Maduna's exile was silent. No whip cracked, no guard dragged her through the dust. But silence itself marched her out of the village. After the trial by wind, no one dared touch her, but no one stood by her either. She was told, in quiet words and lowered eyes, to leave. The elders did not scream. They did not curse her. They simply pointed toward the edge of the forest, where the old widow huts stood, abandoned, crumbling, long forgotten. She carried no bags, only shame. The mark on her wrist, where the beaded necklace had burned itself into her skin, was now a permanent scar, twisted and dark like a rope of charcoal. She covered it, but the villagers had seen. They had all seen. The wind had chosen. The dead had spoken. In the village, people avoided saying her name. They called her the woman at the edge or simply her. Mothers told their daughters not to take food from strangers. Men crossed the path if she walked it. No one went near her hut after sunset. Not anymore. But Maduna's punishment had only just begun. In the first days, she tried to live like nothing had changed. She swept the cracked floor of her little hut. She lit small fires. She tried cooking him stew. But every time she prepared a meal, it turned rotten before the first bite. The water in her calabash grew black with insects by morning. Her firewood hissed and spat sparks at her ankles. Even her shadow no longer followed her properly, it moved too slow, too sharp at the edges. At night, the sounds began. It started softly, the creak of a cradle. A slow, rhythmic rocking, though there was no cradle in her hut, no child, no furniture that could move. Then the whispers. Her name, not shouted, not spoken, whispered, long and low, from corners where the light didn't reach. Maduna. She stopped sleeping. Her eyes grew red with sleeplessness, her limbs thin, her words jumbled. One night, she tore her mattress to pieces, screaming that rats were crawling through her ears. But there were no rats. Then came the singing. It drifted on the wind. The lullaby. The one Zelma had hummed. But now, it echoed with a voice too old and too deep to belong to any living child. Maduna stumbled to the village gate one morning, barefoot and covered in mud. Her hair tangled, her lips cracked. She found Zelma drawing water alone. The girl looked up, not afraid, not angry. Just calm. Maduna fell to her knees. Please. I was wrong. I didn't mean, I was afraid. Your mother, she was always stronger than me, and I wanted. I only wanted. Zelma said nothing. But she began to sing. The same lullaby. And as she sang, her voice changed, rising, deepening, smoothing into the soft, rich tone of a woman long dead. The sound was too precise. Too real. It didn't belong in a living throat. The birds nearby fell silent. Even the water stopped moving. Maduna trembled. Zelma turned and walked away. She didn't need to say a word. Maduna didn't return to the village after that. The villagers said they saw her wandering the woods at night, mumbling to herself, trying to bury things in the ground that the earth kept spitting back. One child claimed to see her standing at the river's edge, talking to no one, swaying like a reed. No one dared approach. Then, one morning, she was gone. The birds sang louder than usual that day. No one saw her leave. No footprints in the dirt. No sound of her voice. No sign of struggle. Her hut was still intact, door shut tight. But when they opened it, the air reeked of smoke and wet earth. In the center of the floor lay the beaded anklet. Not the one Zelma wore. The other one. The one that had burned itself into Maduna's wrist, now lying still, coiled like a sleeping serpent, smoke curling from its beads. Her clothes remained folded in the corner. A bowl of spoiled stew sat by the fire. But Maduna was gone. Some whispered she ran into the forest and was taken by beasts. Others claimed she drowned herself in the river, the same river that had risen to block her escape during the trial. But the old women knew better. The ghost came, they said, whispering behind their hands. She waited. She sang. Then she took her. That night, as the wind rolled through the village again, many lay awake, listening. Far off, beyond the trees, they heard it. The sound of a wooden cradle. Rocking. Rocking. Back and forth. But no one dared look. The village changed, slowly but surely. Long after the winds had stilled and the whispers faded from the shadows, people began to speak Zelma's name with reverence. Not as the silent girl who once wept by the river, but as the woman who sang again, whose voice carried not just melody, but memory. Years passed. Zelma grew into her face, her limbs, her name. She no longer walked with her eyes downcast. She walked barefoot in the grass, anklet still wrapped around her ankle, a constant rhythm to her step. The same one her mother once wore. The same one that had refused to burn. Now, she was called Mama Zelma by those who had no one else to call mother. The compound she inherited at the edge of the village, the same one once filled with shouts and silence, was now a sanctuary. Children who had lost mothers found refuge there. Girls too afraid to speak found their voices there. And every evening, just before sunset, Zelma gathered them beneath the sacred tree and sang. The lullaby was always the same. Soft, low, as if spoken through cupped hands. It curled through the air like smoke, warming the bones, quieting the restless. Some children would fall asleep against her lap before the final line. Others would hum along without knowing how they remembered the tune. But all would listen. The tree they sat beneath was the one where Zelma had once buried a chicken bone, trembling in silence, begging for her mother to return. Now it stood tall, its branches thick and strong. And carved into the bark, just above a bed of wildflowers, was a single handprint, black as coal, wide and unmistakably human. No one knew how it got there. No one tried to erase it. It remained, year after year, as if the tree itself remembered. The village elders had come to see Zelma not as cursed, but as chosen. They brought their sick to her, their sleepless babies, their troubled dreams. She gave them herbs, advice, and sometimes only a song, and that was enough. One old man swore she had cured his fever with nothing but her humming. A woman once claimed she went into labor early, but her contractions stopped the moment Zelma touched her belly and sang. No one doubted it. Not anymore. The Festival of Mothers, once a painful memory, became her most cherished day. Each year, girls dressed in yellow danced beneath her tree. They wove flowers into each other's hair. They sang the old songs, and Zelma watched with a soft smile. She no longer needed to be in the center. Her voice filled the space between theirs, steady, strong, and warm. And always, without fail, a white bird appeared. It perched above her house at sunrise, where the roof met the flame tree's reaching branches. Its feathers were bright as fresh milk, its eyes dark and still. No one ever saw it arrive. It simply was, waiting, watching. When Zelma sang, the bird chirped back in perfect time, its high, lilting calls fitting between her verses like a second voice, a harmony only the heart could hear. The children asked about the bird often. Why does it come every year? Where does it go when the music stops? Zelma would smile but never answer directly. She likes my voice, she would say with a shrug. Maybe she used to sing, too. The old women knew what it meant. She never left her child, they whispered. That mother walks beside her still. Some nights, after the children had slept and the village had grown quiet, people said they heard two voices in the air, not just one. One young and steady, the other older, smoother, ancient. They would blend together, weaving lullabies in the dark. Even those who had never known the song before would wake up with it on their tongues, unable to explain why. The hut Madonna once haunted near the woods was swallowed by vines in silence. No one rebuilt it. No one spoke her name. But the tale lingered like smoke on old wood, the woman who burned from within, marked by guilt, taken by the ghost who had rocked the cradle. Children would sneak glances toward the woods and ask Zelma, is she still out there? She would only hum and tap her anklet against the floor. Sometimes, that was answer enough. Zelma aged gently. Her hair grew silver at the temples, her smile deeper, her voice richer. But the song never left her. It grew with her, sharpened with sorrow, softened with joy. She had known grief like a blade to the chest, but she had also known healing like the sun after rain. She became more than a healer. She became legend. One day, a girl arrived at her door, small, barefoot, face streaked with dried tears. She wouldn't speak. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep. Zelma held her gently and whispered, "It's all right. I remember, too." That night, she sang for her. The girl did not stir. She only listened. When morning came, the girl had wrapped her arms around Zelma's waist and slept with her cheek on her lap. The anklet at Zelma's ankle glowed faintly in the dawn light. The white bird chirped once from the roof. Zelma lifted her eyes to the tree. The handprint of ash was still there, undisturbed, untouched by rain or wind. She closed her eyes, let the breeze wash over her, and sang one last line from her mother's lullaby. The wind carried it into the trees. And the trees whispered back. Years later, mothers would sit under that tree and sing with their children. Girls who once feared their own voices would hum softly while grinding yam. And the children, those born long after Zelma's name had faded into legend, would ask their grandmothers, who first sang this song. The old women would smile and answer gently, the girl who sang her mother back. Because some say ghosts linger in grief. But others say they linger in love. And so long as the song is sung, in the hush of night, in the crackle of fire, in the breath between heartbeats, a mother may return. Even if only to hum. When a girl sings her mother's lullaby, even the dead rise to listen.